Last week, a mother in Phoenix stood at a Walmart self-checkout and watched the total climb past $200. She had $174 in her account. The chicken went back on the shelf. Her kids had pasta that night. No drama, no breakdown at the register. Just a quiet, practiced decision that millions of American families are making every single week in 2026. 78% of American families told pollsters this year that they are making impossible choices between groceries and other basic necessities. Not 10%, not 30%, 78%. And the number that is supposed to reassure you, the government's official food inflation figure of 2.4%, is technically accurate and completely misleading at the same time. Today, I'm going to show you exactly why. I'm going to show you the gap between the number Washington publishes and the reality at your checkout line. I'm going to show you what the oil shock that started on February 28th is about to do to every item in your refrigerator. And I'm going to show you what families who understand what is actually happening are doing right now to protect themselves before the next wave hits. Because here is what nobody on television is connecting for you. The Strait of Hormuz closed 5 weeks ago. Diesel is climbing toward $5 a gallon, and every link in the American food supply chain, the fertilizer that grows the crops, the processing plants that convert raw ingredients into finished food, the refrigerated trucks that carry that food to your store, every single one runs on the energy that just became dramatically more expensive. The $950 per month it costs to feed a family of 4 at the absolute bare minimum was $700 to $70 4 years ago. By summer, that floor is likely to be $100. And for the 78% of families already choosing between groceries and everything else, that increase is not a statistic. It is the difference between feeding your children and not. Let me start with the number the government gives you and show you why it does not mean what you think it means. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that food-at-home prices rose 2.4% year over year in February 2026. That sounds almost manageable. It sounds like the worst is behind us. But that 2.4% is not measured from 2020. It is measured from February 2025. It sits on top of the 5% increase from 2023, on top of the 11.4% spike in 2022, on top of the 3.5% increase in 2021. When you compound all of those increases together, the cumulative reality is that food prices are approximately 24% higher than they were in 2020. The grocery cart that cost $200 in 2020 costs $248 today. The annual headline number sounds small. The accumulated total over 5 years is devastating, and it is not distributed evenly across the categories you actually buy. The USDA's Economic Research Service tracks 15 separate food categories, and the variation is staggering. Beef and veal prices rose 14.4% year over year through February 2026. If your family eats beef, your protein costs did not go up 2.4%. They went up 14.4%. Sugar and sweets are projected to rise 6.7% this year. Non-alcoholic beverages, driven largely by coffee prices, are projected to increase 5.2%. Fresh vegetables saw significant price movement month over month. These are not luxury items. Meat, vegetables, something to drink, the ingredients of a basic American dinner. The prices of all three are rising faster than the headline inflation number suggests. And the headline inflation number is already rising faster than wages. But here's the number that the government does not put on a press release, the number that tells you what is actually happening inside American households right now, behind closed doors, at kitchen tables across this country. Credit One Bank's 2026 Financial Confidence Index, which surveyed 1,000 U.S. adults, found that 54% of American consumers said groceries and everyday essentials had the single biggest impact on their personal finances over the past year. Not housing, not healthcare, not credit card debt, groceries. The grocery store is where the economy became personal for the majority of Americans. And when that same survey asked how people feel about their finances heading into 2026, 44% said they do not feel financially prepared for economic uncertainty. 62% of consumers making under $50,000 per year have no emergency savings whatsoever, no buffer, no cushion, no margin for error. And 28% said their credit card balance increased in 2025, while only 14% said it decreased. The debt is growing, the savings are gone, and the grocery bill is the largest single pressure point driving both of those trends. Now, let me show you what is happening beneath the surface of those survey numbers. Because the research from the Urban Institute confirms the most alarming financial behavior pattern I have seen in modern American economic data. 1 in 4 American adults is now paying for groceries with a credit card and carrying that balance into the following month. They are not using credit for convenience. They are using credit for survival. They are borrowing money at 21% interest or higher to buy milk, bread, chicken, and vegetables. When you put $200 of groceries on a credit card at 28% APR, which is the current average according to multiple industry sources, and you carry that balance for 12 months, you will pay approximately $256 for that $200 worth of food. The interest charges transform your grocery bill into a debt instrument, and the debt from last month's groceries now competes with this month's grocery budget for the same limited dollars. The spiral is mathematical. It does not stop until income rises faster than prices. Income is not rising faster than prices. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city or state in the comments below. I want to know which parts of the country are feeling this the hardest, because the data shows that where you live determines how severely this crisis hits your family. The No Kid Hungry organization commissioned a poll of families with children in New York State in early February 2026. 74% of families with children reported having to choose between food and other basic necessities, including childcare and healthcare. 74%. That is not a rounding error. That is 3 out of every 4 families with children making an impossible choice every single month. Among Black families, the number was 87%. Among Latino families, 84%. 52% of families in New York City reported taking on additional debt, specifically to afford meals. 39% of families with children are now using buy now, pay later apps to purchase groceries. When a parent opens a payment app at the checkout line to split the cost of feeding their children into 4 installments, that is not financial innovation. That is desperation wearing the mask of technology. And the federal government's own data confirms exactly what those surveys are measuring. The USDA reported that in 2024, 47.9 million people in 18.3 million households experienced food insecurity, difficulty acquiring adequate food due to a lack of resources. That is 13.7% of all American households, nearly 1 in 7. Among Black households, 24.4% were food insecure. Among Hispanic households, 20.2%. Among American Indian and Alaskan Native households, 30.9%, nearly 1 in 3. And those numbers were recorded before the SNAP cuts included in the 2025 legislation took effect, before the Iran conflict sent oil above $100, before diesel crossed $4 per gallon, before the cascade of energy cost increases began flowing into every stage of the food supply chain, which brings me to the mechanism that is about to make everything I just described dramatically worse. And this is the part that nobody on cable news is drawing for you clearly. Let me connect these dots right now. Every piece of food you buy at a grocery store was transported by a truck that burns diesel. The lettuce from California, the oranges from Florida, the beef from Texas, the milk from Wisconsin, the frozen meals from processing plants in every state. Every single item traveled by truck. When diesel was $3 per gallon, the transportation cost was built into the shelf price you paid. When diesel crosses $4, that cost increases. When diesel approaches $5, which is where current projections are pointing in the coming weeks, the transportation cost per item surges across the entire system simultaneously. But diesel is only the first link in the chain. The fertilizer that grows the crops is manufactured using natural gas. The Strait of Hormuz normally carries approximately 20 to 30% of internationally traded fertilizers. That supply is now disrupted. Fertilizer prices rise. Farmers pay more to grow food. Processors pay more to buy raw ingredients. Manufacturers pay more to produce finished products. Distributors pay more to warehouse and move them. Truckers pay more to deliver them to stores. And every single one of those cost increases is passed through to the price on the shelf. You are the last link in that chain. You absorb every accumulated dollar of cost from every step above you. The USDA predicted that overall food prices would rise 3.6% in 2026, but that prediction was published before the full impact of sustained oil above $100 was incorporated, before the energy infrastructure attacks that disrupted regional supply, before diesel began its climb toward $5. Capital Economics estimates that sustained $100 oil adds 0.6 to 0.7 percentage points to global inflation. The Dallas Federal Reserve models it even higher, at 1.3 percentage points for U.S. headline inflation. Applied specifically to food, where energy is an input at every single stage of production and distribution, the impact is larger than those broad estimates suggest. A reasonable estimate, based on the historical relationship between diesel prices and food costs, is that this oil shock will add an additional 2 to 3 percentage points to food inflation beyond what the USDA already projected. That would put real food inflation for 2026 in the range of 5 to 6%, not the 2.4% the February data showed. 5 to 6% on top of the 24% cumulative increase since 2020, on top of wages that are growing at just 3.5%, the slowest pace since 2021. That does not sound catastrophic until you remember that this is the 5th consecutive year of increases. The family spending $450 per month in 2020 is now spending $540. By the end of 2026, they will be spending $567 or more. An additional $117 per month compared to 4 years ago, $400 per year. For the 62% of households making under $50,000 who have zero emergency savings, $400 per year is not a budget line adjustment. It is a structural crisis. And let me give you the specific math that makes this real, because abstract percentages hide the actual human pain. A family earning $40,000 per year takes home approximately $33,000 after federal and state taxes. Rent on a modest two-bedroom apartment in most American cities averages $1,500 per month. That is $18,000 per year. After rent, this family has $15,000 left for a car payment, insurance, gasoline, utilities, phone, healthcare, clothing, and food. When gasoline goes from $2.80 to $4.10 per gallon, their annual fuel cost increases by roughly $1,100 to $1,800. When electricity rises, because natural gas prices are elevated, another $300 to $500 per year. By the time every other fixed obligation is covered, the money available for food may be $400 to $500 per month for a family of four. The USDA Thrifty Plan says they need $950. The gap is $450 per month. No amount of couponing, no amount of meal planning, no amount of switching from beef to rice and beans closes a $450 structural monthly deficit. This is not a budgeting problem. It is a math problem. And the math is getting worse. This is why 28% of American consumers told Credit One Bank that their credit card balance increased in 2025. Not because they were making irresponsible choices, not because they were buying luxury goods or living beyond their means, because their means no longer cover the basics. The credit card is not financing discretionary spending, it is financing survival. And the interest on that survival debt, compounding at 21 to 28% annually, is creating a second crisis layered directly on top of the first one. Professor Christopher Barrett of Cornell University put it directly. Consumers, especially those on fixed and low incomes, will face increasingly difficult food purchase decisions as food prices rise faster than incomes. Joseph Glauber of the International Food Policy Research Institute added that while food price inflation has slowed from the peaks of 2 to 3 years ago, prices remain high and are not likely to fall back to where they were. At some point, these elevated prices become the new normal. But for now, families still experience sticker shock at every checkout. That sticker shock is not irrational. It is the mathematically correct response to a 24% cumulative increase that compressed into 4 years. To put that in historical context, the last time American food prices rose this fast was the stagflationary crisis of the 1970s. Between 1973 and 1980, food prices in America approximately doubled. Families responded exactly the way they are responding now. They substituted cheaper proteins. They grew gardens. They clipped coupons. They went into debt. And the crisis did not resolve until Paul Volcker raised interest rates to 20% in 1980 and broke inflation through the most severe recession since the Great Depression. The cure was almost as painful as the disease. The Federal Reserve of 2026 cannot administer that cure. The national debt has exceeded $38 trillion. Interest payments have crossed nearly $1 trillion annually. Raising rates to the levels Volcker used would trigger a sovereign debt crisis. And the Fed is already frozen between two impossible choices. Fight the inflation the oil shock is driving higher, or support an economy that lost 133,000 jobs in February and is growing at barely 0.7% GDP. Cut rates and food inflation accelerates. Raise rates and the employment families depend on to buy food collapses. There is no clean monetary policy path out of this. The Federal Reserve cannot solve your grocery bill. That reality needs to be understood clearly. Now, let me show you the geographic dimension of this crisis, because the national average is hiding a dramatic split that determines how hard this hits your specific family. A Consumer Affairs analysis of grocery price data across 150,000 stores found that grocery inflation varies by as much as 5 percentage points from state to state. A family of four in Pennsylvania, spending $750 per month on groceries, saw their bill rise by approximately $61.50 per month over a 12-month period. A family in Colorado spending the same amount saw an increase of just $21.75. That is a $470 annual difference between two families buying essentially the same groceries in different states. Where you live determines how severely this crisis hits your budget. And the states with the highest grocery inflation tend to be the states where wages are lowest and where populations are most dependent on employment income that the oil shock is now threatening. This is the K-shaped food economy that has been building since 2020 and is now reaching its most extreme form. Families with higher incomes absorb price increases without changing behavior. They still buy organic, still buy brand name, still eat out multiple times a week. Families at the median and below make substitutions. They switch from beef to chicken, from chicken to rice and beans, from fresh vegetables to canned, from brand name to store brand. These substitutions are invisible in the aggregate inflation data. The BLS measures the price change of the same basket of goods. It does not measure the change in the basket itself. When a family stops buying beef because they have been priced out of the category entirely, the inflation rate for beef is still 14.4%. But the family is not paying that rate because they can no longer afford to. Their lived experience of food inflation is not a percentage. It is the absence of foods they used to eat. And now the safety nets that cushioned the worst of the pandemic era impact have been systematically dismantled. Enhanced SNAP allotments expired in March 2023, reducing the average individual benefit by approximately $90 per month. Universal free school lunches ended. Medicare Advantage, grocery flex cards for seniors were scaled back. And the 2025 legislation included historic cuts to SNAP that are pushing millions of additional households into food insecurity at precisely the moment food prices are accelerating again. The Center on Budget and Policy Priorities warned explicitly that food insecurity could rise in the coming years as millions of people lose food assistance they depend on. The safety net was designed to protect vulnerable families from exactly the kind of compound pressure that 2026 is delivering, and the safety net has been removed just as the pressure intensifies. Let me address two populations that are being hit harder than anyone and that national averages consistently obscure. The first is children. When a family cannot afford groceries, the children eat last and eat least. The No Kid Hungry data, showing 74% of families with children choosing between food and other necessities, means that millions of American children are going to school hungry in 2026. The end of universal free school lunches means that families who do not qualify for reduced price programs must now pay for meals that were previously free. For a family with 2 children, school lunch at $3.50 per child per day costs approximately $140 per month during the school year. That is $140 per month that was not in their budget 2 years ago. And when summer arrives and school meals end entirely, the food gap widens further. Summer is historically the worst period for childhood hunger in America because the school meal safety net disappears for 3 months. The children most dependent on those meals come from the families least able to replace them. The second population is seniors on fixed incomes. Social Security provides a cost of living adjustment based on the overall CPI, not on food-specific inflation. When food prices rise faster than overall inflation, which they have consistently done in 2026, seniors on Social Security experience a purchasing power gap that grows compounding every single month. A senior receiving a 3% COLE adjustment but facing 5 to 6% food inflation is losing 2 to 3% of their food purchasing power annually. Compounded over 3 or 4 years, that means buying power for food has declined 10% or more since the pandemic era expansions ended. The generation that saved for retirement and expected a fixed income to cover basic needs is discovering that fixed income does not work in an environment where the cost of basic needs is not fixed. So what do you actually do if your family is feeling this pressure right now? Because understanding the problem is step 1. Acting on it before the next wave arrives is step 2. And the window for some of these actions is narrowing fast. First, build a precise food budget based on what you are actually spending, not what you estimate. Track every grocery purchase for 2 weeks, including the convenience store stops, the vending machines, the impulse buys that do not feel like real groceries but absolutely show up on the bank statement. The average American household underestimates food spending by 15 to 20%. You cannot manage a budget you are not accurately measuring. Second, if you are putting groceries on a credit card and carrying that balance, stop immediately. The interest on carried grocery balances turns a 5% food price increase into a 25 to 30% effective cost increase over time. Switch to cash or debit for grocery purchases. This forces a hard spending constraint that credit removes. Financial advisors consistently identify this as the single most impactful behavioral change available to families in food debt. Third, build your meal plan around what is actually cheap right now. The USDA data projects egg prices to decline 27% in 2026. Rice, dried beans, pasta, and frozen vegetables remain among the cheapest calorie sources available. Beef, at 14.4% annual inflation, is effectively a luxury protein in this environment. Chicken, eggs, and legumes provide equivalent nutrition at a fraction of the cost. The families who navigated the food price spikes of the 1970s did so by fundamentally changing what they ate, not by trying to afford the same diet at higher prices. That same logic applies today. Fourth, and I want to say this as directly as possible, if you qualify for SNAP, WIC, or other food assistance programs, apply now. Do not wait. The stigma around accessing programs you qualify for is one of the most destructive forces in food insecurity. These programs exist specifically for this moment. SNAP exists for this. WIC exists for mothers and young children facing exactly this pressure. Local food banks and community organizations provide immediate help without means testing in many cases. Call 211 to find resources in your area. The Urban Institute research found clearly that strengthening safety net access helps prevent families from turning to high-interest debt to feed themselves. Every dollar of SNAP benefit a family receives is a dollar they do not put on a credit card at 28% interest. That math is simple, and it is real. Fifth, understand that the oil shock has not yet fully flowed through to food prices. The February CPI data showing 2.4% food inflation does not capture the impact of sustained $100 oil. The March CPI, releasing on April 10th, will begin showing the acceleration. By May and June, the full impact of diesel above $4 and disrupted fertilizer supply chains will be visible on store shelves. If your food budget is under pressure now, it will be under greater pressure in 60 days. The families who plan for that acceleration today, rather than reacting to it when it arrives, will have options that reactive families will not. Now, let me address what you're going to hear from people who want to minimize what I have just shown you. They will say food inflation is slowing. That is technically true on a year-over-year basis. The annual rate of increase is lower than 2022's 11.4% peak. But slowing inflation does not mean declining prices. Prices are still rising. They are just rising more slowly than they were at the worst of the pandemic spike. A family that has seen their grocery bill increase 24% over 4 years does not feel relief because this year's increase is 5% instead of 11%. The cumulative damage is permanent. They will say wages have risen too. Also technically true. Average hourly earnings are up 3.5% year over year. But 3.5% wage growth against 5 to 6% food inflation means your real food purchasing power is declining. You are earning more dollars. Those dollars buy less food. The gap between wage growth and food price growth is the mechanism that converts a working family into a food insecure family. And that gap has been negative for most of the past 4 years. They will say people need to budget better, cook from scratch, use coupons. Those are valid individual strategies. They are not solutions to a structural problem. When the USDA Thrifty Food Plan, the absolute cheapest way to feed a family of 4, costs $950 per month, and that family's remaining income after housing and transportation and healthcare leaves $700 for food, no coupon closes a $250 monthly structural gap. The gap is not a discipline problem. It is a math problem. Here is where everything stands right now. 54% of Americans say groceries are their single biggest financial pressure. 1 in 4 adults carry grocery debt on credit cards at 21 to 28% interest. 47.9 million people experienced food insecurity in 2024, before the oil shock and before the SNAP cuts. 62% of lower-income households have zero emergency savings. Beef is up 14.4%. The USDA Thrifty Plan for a family of 4 costs $950 per month. Diesel is heading toward $5 to $6 per gallon. The Strait of Hormuz has been effectively closed for over 5 weeks. The Federal Reserve is frozen between 2 paths that both cause damage, and the safety nets have been reduced precisely as the pressure intensifies. In 2020, the average family of 4 could feed itself on the USDA Thrifty Plan for $770 per month. In 2026, that same plan costs $950. The increase is $180 per month, $1,260 per year. For a family earning the median household income of approximately $75,000, that increase alone redirects nearly 3% of their gross annual income from everything else in their budget to the single category of putting food on the table. And that is the Thrifty Plan, the bare minimum, the cheapest possible diet. Families following the moderate cost plan. The USDA says most Americans actually follow are spending approximately $1,230 per month on food. Families on the liberal plan, which includes modest brand name purchasing and occasional convenience items, are spending over $1,960 per month, $21,000 per year on groceries alone. For millions of families, the annual grocery bill now exceeds the annual car payment, annual utility costs, and in some regions, even the annual healthcare premium. This crisis is not coming. It is here. It has been building for 4 years. It accelerated with the oil shock. It is compounding every week that diesel remains above $4. It deepens with every SNAP cut that removes assistance from families already on the edge. And it is invisible in the national statistics because the 2.4% headline number does not capture the 24% cumulative reality that families experience every time they open their refrigerator and find it emptier than it was 4 years ago for the same amount of money. The checkout line is where the economy becomes real. And for the majority of American families right now, what is real is that the same cart of groceries that cost $200 in 2020 costs $248 today. By the end of this summer, it will cost more. That is not a forecast. That is the arithmetic of an oil shock working through a food supply chain that runs entirely on energy that just became dramatically more expensive. The data is public. The programs that can help exist. And the families who act on this information now, who adjust before the pressure becomes unbearable, who access available assistance before the debt becomes unmanageable, who make the changes the math demands, those are the families who come through this without it defining their financial future. Grocery prices do not go back down. In modern American history, they never have. They stabilize. They become the new normal. The new normal of 2026 is 24% above where it was 4 years ago and climbing. The question is not whether your grocery bill is going up. It already has. The question is whether you are positioned to absorb what comes next, or whether you are still waiting for prices to come back down to a world that no longer exists. If this video helped you understand what is actually happening, share it with someone who needs to see it. Subscribe to Recession Warnings so you do not miss the analysis of the March CPI data releasing April 10th. That report will show the first wave of the oil shock hitting food prices in real time. And drop your state or city in the comments. I want to map exactly which communities are being hit hardest by this and cover them specifically in the next video.